Hi, this is Raman, your tutor from Alberta Real Estate School. In today's video, we will do a deep dive on the Dower Act. This is a topic that you will always see a question on. Doesn't matter what exam it is, there will be a question on Dower Act, whether it's fundamentals, residential, mortgage brokerage. Every single exam tends to have a question on Dower Act. This is also a concept that is important for us as realtors. When you're practicing as a realtor, this is something you need to be aware of, and it is a very important topic both from exam perspective as well as from the actual practice perspective. So let's dive in.
Let's take a look at Dower Act. Dower Act is one of those things that is always tested on the exam. And this is not about this particular exam. Previous exams, every single time there is a question on the Dower Act, because Dower Act is very, very important topic. This is something that we will come up across a lot in our practice. If you're working as a real estate agent, Dower Act is something you do need to know about. And that's why this is a topic that always shows up on the exam. So let's break it down. First of all, what is Dower Act? So ask yourself the question, what? Now, Dower Act protects the rights of untitled spouse in a matrimonial home, which means if there is one person on the title and that person is married, the spouse that is not on the title, that spouse's rights will be protected. That means the title spouse, the person who is listed on the certificate of title, will not be able to dispose of the property, which means sell, mortgage, lease the property without the consent of the untitled spouse. So if two people are married and only one person is on the title, they're not able to sell the property without the consent from the second person who is not on the title. And what happens if the person dies? If the person who is on the title dies, it then creates a life estate for the untitled spouse in the property, which means that this person who is not on the title will be able to use the property, they'll be able to control the property, live in the property, lease it, whatever they choose to do with the property, they are able to do it for their lifetime. Now, once this person dies, the estate will then pass to whoever the fee simple owner of the property is, which means if the person who was on the title willed it to someone, the property will then pass on to that person after the title or the untitled spouse dies. So this is the Dower Act. So what do we need to know? First of all, the definition. What is it? It protects the rights of the untitled spouse in a matrimonial home. And what does this mean? It means that the person who's on the title, if there's only one person on the title, they're not able to sell that property without the consent of the other spouse. And if the person who's on the title dies, it will then create a life estate for the person who's not on the title. So that way they have a place to live, so that they are not on the street when that title spouse dies. So that's Dower Act. Now, when does it apply? In order to answer that question, we have to ask three more questions. First, is the person legally married? If two people are legally married, then Dower Act will apply if there's only one person on the title. And then that's the second question, is there only one name on the title? In this case, Dower Act would apply. And then third question we have to ask is, has either spouse resided in the home after getting married? This is very important. So there can be circumstances where one person purchased the property prior to the marriage. So they brought the property into the marriage. In that case, if both of them are living in the property, or even one person has lived in the property since the time of the marriage, then Dower Act would apply. And this is where we'll have to make sure that we do something about it. The next question is, what do we need to do in case the Dower Act applies? So after we have asked these questions, now let's say there is only one person on the title, people are legally married, they're living in the property. What do we do now? In this case, it's very important, first of all, that we check the certificate of title. We need to confirm that there's only one person on the title. And then second step we'll have to do is we'll have to get the dower consent signed from the untitled spouse, the person that is not listed on the title. And this way we'll be able to list the property and not get in trouble. The other option is dower release getting signed. The difference between dower consent and dower release is dower release basically releases all the rights of the spouse. So that means that spouse is basically saying, I have nothing to do with this property, and the title spouse can do whatever they choose with the property. Dower consent, on the other hand, doesn't release all the rights every time when we go list the property, or we do a transaction, we'll have to get the dower consent signed. It doesn't release the rights forever. It only applies to that particular transaction. Next step that we have to do after we get the dower consent signed would be to add the dower consent to the brokerage file. It is very important for us to make sure we are keeping all the trade records, and this is an important thing because we do not want to get in trouble after. So we have to make sure we put it in our brokerage file. All right, so the next thing is, what type of questions can we expect on this topic? So in terms of the exam question, there are two types of questions. One would be the definition question. So any topic that we look at, there are always two types of questions that can be on the exam. In terms of the definition question, this will be a straightforward definition question. So for example, which of the following statements best describe the term Dower Act? A, it protects the rights of the titled spouse in the matrimonial home when there's a sole owner on the certificate of title. Or B, it protects the rights of the untitled spouse in the matrimonial home when the property is held in joint tenancy. Option C, it protects the rights of the untitled spouse in the matrimonial home when there is a sole owner on the certificate of title. Or D, it protects the rights of the untitled spouse in the matrimonial home when property is held as tenants in common. So these are the four options. And in this case, the correct answer is C. So the definition of Dower Act is that Dower Act protects the rights of the untitled spouse in the matrimonial home when there's a sole owner on the certificate of title. So there has to be two people who are married living in their property, and there's only one person on the title. In terms of the different options here, some of these options will look very similar. And what you want to do is, as you're answering the questions, you want to look at each option individually. So let's take a look at option A here. So it says it protects the rights of the title spouse. We do not need to protect the right of the title spouse because the title spouse is already on the title. They already have the right to the property. Their rights do not have to be protected. So that one is incorrect. Option B here, it says it protects the rights of the untitled spouse in the matrimonial home when the property is held in joint tenancy. If the property is held in joint tenancy, that means there are two people on the title. And when there are two people on the title, when both of them are on the title, we do not need to get a dower consent signed. In that case, dower consent or Dower Act won't even apply. Option C is correct one. Option D here, it protects the rights of the untitled spouse in the matrimonial home when the property is held as tenants in common. So here, again, this is a trick one here, because when they're talking about tenants in common, there are two people on the title. So in this case, when both of the spouses are on the title, we do not need to worry about Dower Act. They will both have to sign the contract anyway. So that option doesn't apply. So all three of these options that are incorrect are actually, they are tricky. They're trying to trick you because they're putting two different things together. So we will cross all those out and we have the correct one, which is answer C. Now, the second type of question you may see on the exam would be scenario questions. So scenario questions are where they will give you a scenario and you will have to come up with a correct answer. So let's take a look. In this case, John is a real estate professional with prime brokerage helping Sam and Melissa purchase their new home. On pulling the title for the property, John sees that Melissa is the sole owner of the property as she had purchased the place prior to their marriage. Which of the following statements apply in this situation? Okay, option A, Dower Act does not apply as Melissa had purchased the property prior to their marriage. Option B, Dower Act does not apply as Sam and Melissa plan to use the property as a rental. Option C, Melissa needs to sign a dower release and register it on the title of the property. Or option D, Sam will need to sign a dower consent so Melissa can sell the property. In this case, the correct answer is D. It doesn't matter if the property was brought into the marriage. So if one person had the property prior to the marriage, because they are married and because either spouse or both the spouses have lived in the property, Dower Act would apply, which means the untitled spouse would have to give consent in order for the property to be sold. So in this case, the untitled spouse would be Sam because Melissa owned the property prior to marriage, but because they're living in this property right now, Dower Act would apply. So the correct answer in this case would be D. We would get Sam to sign the dower consent, and that would then go into the brokerage file. So that's it for today. If you would like some extra help in preparing for the real estate exam or the mortgage brokerage exam, I invite you to check out the website www.albertarealestateschool.com. We have practice questions for various courses as well as notes, and of course I offer tutoring as well. So if you need help with any of those, I invite you to either call me or check out the website. The phone number is 587-936-7779. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.